I would like to welcome us to the 2021 CASDA AGM. We're very glad to have you here. My name is Debbie Irish, and I am the chair of the CASDA Board of Directors. Please begin by typing in your full name, and if you belong to an organization, if you can include that as well, into the chat function so that we can accurately include you in our AGM minutes. The AGM will last approximately 30 minutes, followed by a panel discussion. We will have several people joining us today on the webinar, so we have muted participant lines to reduce the noise disruptions. I would now like to invite Lance Scout to provide the land acknowledgement and opening prayer.
Okay, tanse kia. Okay, I just wanted to acknowledge the creation story in all our four corners of man. We have to acknowledge the dinosaurs because they have been with us and still are prevalent in showing us their existence, as well as the whole process of what we're finding today in the 21st century. We're finding a lot of new things that are within what we call as Mother Earth or Turtle Island. But, to this contemporary, this renaissance that we have gone through in respect to North America, I just like to acknowledge in the 1800s, the early 1800s is when colonization had occurred. The greetings of acknowledging the Europeans, the Spanish. So from that point on in colonization, it came to this point in our lives where we're looking at our treaties. So I'd just like to acknowledge the Treaty 6 territory. I'd like to acknowledge the Métis in this beautiful central Alberta, this land that we all dwell on and we all sustain and all survive on. I'd like to acknowledge the Blackfoot peoples. I'd like to acknowledge the Stoney Nakoda. I'd like to acknowledge the Saulteaux. I also like to acknowledge the Ojibwe, the Anishinaabe, the Kootenays. We all had met at this beautiful central Alberta to begin our peace treaties. So this is very sacred territory that we have all survived on for millions of years, and we're still here. So I'd just like to acknowledge that. And I wanted to, in a prayer, there's always tobacco. The first medicine is tobacco. So I'd just like to honor my brother, Grant Bruno, for offering me tobacco. And to acknowledge in any opening prayer and any request that I receive, there's a meaning, there's a dream, there's a vision. And I'm going to be praying for that dream and vision for your organization, for your communities, in respect to the national awareness of autism. I'd like to also pray on the movement that you're all contributing to, the movement to find that awareness and that serenity, that sincerity in working with children, adults, and the elderly that have been diagnosed with autism. It is a lifelong journey. And I just like to acknowledge the nourishment, the life of these children, these adults and these elders. So I'll be praying for them as well. Also in today, your meeting today to go well, and all your children and all your family members, your extended family members, that everything goes well for all of you in health, in prosperity, and in love and kindness, and for the Indigenous peoples to find that vehicle to persevere in this autism awareness. So I'll be praying for the Indigenous communities and the resources that you have created, that they prosper and that they get to help the people in need and the people that will be able to access these resources. So I'm going to light a smudge. I've got some medicine here. So I'm holding the tobacco, and when I'm complete, I'll go offer it to Mother Earth, to Turtle Island. So I'm going to pray in Blackfoot. In your own hearts, please pray. There's 4, for the dream, the vision, the movement, the nourishment, and just to be present with all the work that you've done, and celebrate your work that you have achieved in this past year. Okay. Okay, wa natusio. Okay, wa kipitaki wa kukubeki sumena. Okay, episoatsisena. Buakski wa. Oki tsakum na tuita piaki wa nanwa kimmo kinanwa. Okspomo kinanwa mistoa nanwa. Amo yeni takawa nanwa. Unakamu tawa nanwa yutsinska sinanwa. Iko kakiamu ni takawa na ni sumena niskan. Puyi wa nanawa ni samutu wa nanwa. Samkat samois kayo amatu samanwa. Itsipon sta nanwa pistahkan. Kimmatu kinanamo ni hiyawa. Amoksiwa uatapiwa na pikwawa. Sniksi satapi kwak. Sapatabsis cinnamani xenanwa. O kisatapi kwak. Snitsitapi wawa xitapu yopuawa. Xistakiwa na muyesina. Niko tapuawa. Kimmo kinana konoyo puawa xitsikoa huita piamuksi apo takiksina. Niksi niskannuawa. Amuksi apo takiksena. Kunoyo povaaksiitsikona. Ahtastoapsenan amuksi vananu täsukinneki. Ytsinska senanua autism. Opspioma penanua matapi vananua. Kuita pivananua kiskata kimadaki pohpi vananua. Tänästi amuksi apo takiksa spioma po au täsukinneki. Iko kakio tsukimmisinaan. Kuita piivanaan. Hei wawa sujawahka. Ajoa kipitakio. Tokinaan istoat sinäs kumapi. Spoks tätä amuksi matapiwa. Amuniskannuanaan. Utsenskaatsenanua. Iko kakionaan. Uta sewa nano itapstoaps nanamonitakau itsiponstaa pistahkau. Kemmatu senano xukimmis senahkuita pini tsetapiwa kipäätäpiitseniwa ahspoops tatamuksiwa nano utsenskaatsuava autism. Tsikamotawa kuita piwawa kipäätäpiitseniwa nan kisami päätäpiwawa kutsesenano. Kinnuawa eksuksestenaaniksi mahsuaaksa huitapiivanaan. Annevananua kamutaanivanaan. Niistä vatsamanua säätäpiivanaan. Annevananua. Just touch your heart. Feel the heartbeat. The heartbeat of all our nations. The love, the kindness. And you've taken the prayers to your heart, to your home, to your mind, to your body, your spirit. I wish you all the best, all of you, to continue to help this specific purpose, to fund and to hire and to persevere in support and in all the resources that you're developing. Hey, thank you.
Thank you, Lance. I'd just like to acknowledge that our quorum is 10 organizational members, and I can report that we have more than 10 organizational members present, therefore quorum is met. Please note that this webinar is also being recorded. It is my pleasure to call our AGM to order. You will see that we will be using poll questions for voting purposes. When there is an opportunity to vote for a motion, you will be asked, among other things, in favor, opposed, or abstained. Please select the option that you prefer. You'll see that there's a poll now on your screen. It will be there for approximately 30 seconds. We ask that you vote now, followed by Francisca putting up the results for us all to see. Okay. All right, I'm going to move on to approval of the agenda. And all members should have received, all members who are in good standing 45 days in advance of the AGM are eligible to vote and have received an AGM package with the agenda, last year's minutes, and audited financial statements by email. Please note that there will only be one vote per organization. Okay. Be it resolved that the 2021 annual general meeting agenda is approved. Motion to approve.
I have the motion to approve it. Shino.
Thank you, Shino.
And I'll second that. It's Tanya.
Thank you, Tanya. All in favor? And again, a poll will come up. Right, Francisca, I'm just waiting for the poll to come up to ensure that it is passed. Thank you. All right, review and approve the minutes of the AGM that was held in May 2021. The minutes of the 2020 annual general meeting were circulated to our members for review prior to the meeting. Please ask any questions, comments, or corrections that you have, list them in the chat now. Okay, hearing none, I'd like to call on a motion to approve the 2020 annual general meeting minutes.
This is Maddie. Also move.
Thank you, Maddie.
This is Kim. I'll second.
Thank you, Kim. And a poll will come up to pass the motion. And just waiting for the poll results. Thank you. So I'm just going to move to the next agenda item, which is remarks by the chair. So I'd just like to start by saying an AGM is an official meeting, usually used to take care of business of the organization, which we will get to shortly. But it is also a time to look back and celebrate all that has been accomplished over the past year. It has been a privilege to be on the CASDA board for the last 8 years and to have been the board chair for the past 3. In my final year on the board, as I reflect on that time, I am truly in awe of what has been accomplished. 3 years ago, we had received word that we would be receiving funds from the Canadian government to partially fund our operations. This led to the development of a new strategic plan that included hiring a strategy and operations director, Dr. Jonathan Lai, and transitioning our board from an operations board to a governance board. John arrived at a very busy time with the federal election in full swing, and our advocacy efforts focused on getting a commitment from every federal party to the development of a national autism strategy. Fast forward, and our efforts paid off. A commitment to developing a national autism strategy was added to the mandate letters of the Minister of Health and the Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion. Their first action was to engage the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences in broad-reaching consultation and a comprehensive lit review. CASDA took that opportunity while this work was going on to look inward and outward to new opportunities to engage in activities that furthered the mission of the organization. Margaret Whalen will be presenting a retrospective of the past year, so I will not steal any of her thunder. I know you will share with me the sense of awe in all that has been accomplished this past year. In closing, I would like to pay homage to the incredible team of staff at CASDA. Under John's leadership, we have an incredibly hardworking, dedicated, creative, collaborative, intelligent, innovative, and professional team of staff. It has been my absolute pleasure to work with you. Your enthusiasm to take on new projects, always with a spirit of collaboration, has led CASDA to the incredible place it is today. Our brand recognition with the broader disability community, the federal government, and the community at large has increased significantly through the efforts of this group. John, it has been an incredible pleasure of mine working with you, watching your leadership skills evolve, supporting you in discovering new doors to open, new paths to explore, and finding and leading new opportunities for CASDA. Continue to flourish and impact our community under your leadership. To my colleagues on the board, you give of yourselves and your time selflessly in the pursuit of CASDA's mission. We have transitioned our board from a place of operations to one as governance. This has not always been smooth, but typically one of us gives a gentle reminder of our role and we are back on track. As one of the last long-standing board members to be leaving the board, I know I am leaving the board in great hands. Each of the last 3 years, we have had more board member nominees than we have been able to elect and have had community members engaged in our board committees. This level of enthusiasm for and dedication to the work that CASDA is doing fills me with pride to have been part of it. I will now turn it over to Margaret Whalen, who is supporting CASDA while John is on paternity leave, who will walk you through CASDA's year in review. Marg, are you able to join?
Hello, Debbie. This is Francisca. I don't know where Mark is. She is not in the Zoom at the moment. I'm trying to get in touch with her.
Okay, perhaps we could just juggle the agenda order a little bit, and I will move on to the annual election of directors, and hopefully we can get Marg back on the line to do the year in review at a later time in the agenda. Okay. So I would now like to ask Kim Ward, the chair of our nominations subcommittee, to present the report from the committee.
Thanks, Debbie. The nominations subcommittee of the government's committee worked really hard over the last several months to present the members with candidates who will bring diverse skills and experience to the board of CASDA and to the various committees. When it comes to nominations, the governance committee follows the procedure set out in CASDA's bylaws, and those bylaws allow us to have up to 15 board members. As Debbie mentioned, the last 2 years, we've had more applications than we've actually had positions, which has really been an exceptional position to be in as a board. Our bylaws allow us to have 15 board members. We currently have 3 board members who have completed their term and/or are not standing for re-election. The following directors will not be standing for re-election: Adrian Bohatch, Heather Driscoll, and Debbie Irish, as she will be moving to an ex officio role as past chair. We currently have 7 board members whose terms have not ended and have indicated their intention to continue to serve on the board. Those 7 are Karen Bopp, Maddie Dever, Brian Foster, Shino Nakani, Corey Walker, Jill Farber, and Arshad Zaver. This year, there are 4 returning directors whose current terms have ended and who have been nominated to stand for re-election. Those 4 are Susan Van de Velde Koch, myself, Kim Ward, Tanya McLeod, and Rebecca Kitzinger. The governance committee is recommending that the slate of returning nominees be approved for a 2-year term without a formal ballot. Finally, the governance committee is bringing forward a slate of 4 new nominees for approval for a 2-year term to serve on CASDA's board of directors. The bios for each candidate were shared within the AGM meeting package. The candidates are Pascale, Castonguay, Anne Kresta, Gail Francis, and Priscilla Bunham Riosa. Each of the candidates indicated their commitment to CASDA's purpose and objectives through the interview process. It was really evident that they all share a deep commitment to CASDA's mission and bring a wealth of experience. They bring passion and they bring diverse skills to the board. So that being said, may I have a motion to approve the slate of new nominees to terms of 2 years on the CASDA board of directors?
It's Rebecca. I approve.
I'll second. It's Jill.
And we'll just pop a poll up to vote broadly. And just waiting on the results. Thank you. And Arshad, with your indulgence, Marg is now on the line, so I would like to pop back to just do the year in review.
Thanks, Debbie. And my apologies to everyone. Those of you who know me will find it as no surprise that I was having a technology glitch and couldn't get things organized, but our Wonder Woman Francisca has come to the rescue, and so we'll be all set. I am a poor substitute for Jonathan, but I'm happy to be here in his place to talk to you about the year in review for CASDA. And if you've been receiving the regular newsletters that are sent out, you're probably wondering how on earth they get everything done. Well, I'm sure that when you finish seeing this presentation, you're going to wonder that even more. I'm going to walk you through a month-by-month highlight of the activities of our CASDA team. And it will be available if you want to see, if you wish to refer to it at a later date. But let's start with April of last year, where we launched the Canadian Journal for Autism Equity. And the thing that was most exciting about it is that it is autistic authors, artists, and editors driving this journal. And it has been a very exciting development in the field, offering a platform that amplifies the voices of marginalized individuals and shares their perspectives directly with decision makers and with our members alike. Also in April, we partnered with could we go to the next one? We partnered with Inclusion Canada, to develop this resource on employment, providing a platform that helps individuals on the autism spectrum and also those with intellectual disabilities find jobs and work during COVID and beyond. And it was meant for companies so that they can effectively hire workers and build inclusive workplaces. And it's clear that this will have legs going forward because it provides a foundation for ongoing acceptance and understanding of the need for inclusive workplace environments that include autistic Canadians. The next slide, please. For a second year, we're partnering with Kids Brain Health Network to develop policy working groups. We have been aligning that in two ways. One with our own perspective on a national autism strategy, but also the work that the government is doing in leading the development of the strategy. So the fellows that we have working with us this year will continue the work on producing policy briefs, and the three main areas were the ones that were also identified for the work that was being done on the survey by the academies last year. Again, we were seeking alignment so that we can strengthen and amplify the voice that we have in advocating on behalf of a strong and stable national autism strategy. Next, we worked with Ready, Willing, and Able, one of our partners, as you know, in the building employment opportunities area, to complete an environmental scan of provincial and territorial employment-related programs. It is ensuring that we look at supports that are available to autistic job seekers and employees and their employers and the service providers, all of these key players in ensuring that we have successful employment opportunity for autistic Canadians and also successful workplace environments for those employers who wish to engage with a broader part of our community, including autistic individuals. Next, it takes us to June. And this was a very exciting development where three of our board members, Maddie, Rebecca, and Corey, were able to represent CASDA at the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities through the UN. And their conversation was about providing insights about the deinstitutionalization, the being more in the community, how to make that successful. And I may be skipping ahead, but I know that one of the things that wasn't a successful outcome of that was the introduction and impressing upon those who were there of the importance of the right kind of language of inclusion. So special thanks and shout out to Rebecca for making that happen. Next was a partnership that we had with CCRW, and that was related to a research project seeking to understand how community agencies support and connect with job seekers that have disabilities and who might be in the financial sector. And we identified some relevant resources to inform the Disability Confidence in Finance Toolkit through an autism lens. And again, I think this reflects the direction that CASDA is going in, that it's not just our own sector, but it's engaging with other sectors and bringing to that conversation the autism lens. Next is with the Pediatric Autism Research Cohort, where we supported McMaster Autism Research Team in generating knowledge about diverse pathways and outcomes for children on the spectrum during the preschool and early school years. The research that was generated is intended to help enhance communication between clinicians and families as they work to develop more personalized supports. You see that June was a very busy month. In June, we also connected with the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, looking at ways that we can generate knowledge on the factors that contribute to the diverse pathways and outcomes. Oh, we've talked about this already. Nope, sorry. This is a secondary one. Subsequent to that, we collaborated with CIHR. And this has become a catalyst for some future work that CASDA is currently doing that includes McMaster University. Okay, could we go to the next slide where now we're into the summer months already. And you can see that the levels of partnership that CASDA has engaged in have begun to grow in an exponential way. And I think that's a great tribute to the work of the CASDA team. In partnering with the Institute for Research on Public Policy, we were able to highlight the need for engaging with autistic and autism communities in order to develop a sustainable autism strategy. With the new funding that went to the research that just got finished by the academies, and the position that FAC is taking around more leadership with respect to pursuing the National Autism Strategy, it's important for us to make sure that our voice keeps focusing on the fact that we need stability and good governance if we're going to have a successful and sustainable National Autism Strategy. And this was the means by which we were able to articulate that through a publication in this particular journal. And next, please. Again, partnering with McMaster, we were able to get funding through the Health Systems Impact Fellowship for two fellows, Mackenzie Salt and Sarah Lecarte. And it's going to be an interesting 18 months ahead as we work on this, because we have the fellows in place now. We're just starting to define what mechanisms and tools we're going to use for the advancement of evidence-informed systems change. And I'm quite delighted to see that some of the work that Mackenzie is doing is going to build on the original work that was done by Jonathan Wise back in 2014 around needs assessment surveys, and use that as a launch pad for some of the subsequent work that this group is doing. The next slide, please. And of course, for those of you who feel like we're in a never-ending election cycle, CASDA and our team and our members were very, very active during August around the last federal election to make sure that autism and a national autism strategy remained on the platforms front and center. We need to be vigilant that we're not giving any wiggle room to have this backslide. So we're quite happy with the outcome of that and the level of engagement of our members and the political penetration that we had in making sure that people were talking about this in a united, clear voice on why this was necessary, and clearly getting the message out there that we're not backing down. This needs to happen. The next slide, please. As we launch into the fall, we see a movement in working with the Pan-Canadian Disability Coalition. Again, advocating with all the major political parties that we have to stay focused on disability issues. That debate that we were part of facilitating or nudging along had more than 1,300 registered participants, 700 of whom also attended the debate, which was streamed. Next, we brought together 75 stakeholders from across the country to engage in a conversation about an autism data collaborative. It is in response to recognizing that there's a lot of research going on, but we don't have a good mechanism yet for coordinating all of it or leveraging the relationships and partnerships that are out there. What came out of that was a articulation by a large number of the autism researchers and related interested parties across Canada in forming a Pan-Canadian Autism Data Collaborative. And subsequent to that, there are 3 working groups who are looking at specific areas of autism data where we can build true collaboratives. Next, please. So we have our Autism Leadership Summit in October, which is always an exciting time for people who are involved with CASDA. 200 participants, panelists, moderators coming together where we learn about and weigh in on autism policies. And it's what keeps us focused on the issues related to advancing a national autism strategy. Next, please. With the changes that were happening in Public Health Agency Canada, we felt it was necessary to submit to them a policy brief that outlines our position, who we are, why we're credible, the work we do, providing an update on the National Autism Strategy since 2019, description of current projects and activities. And the driving force behind that is to ensure that the faces may change at Public Health Agency Canada, but the credibility, drive, and focus of CASDA does not. Next page. We also prepared a brief for Employment and Social Development Canada that looked at, again, this goes back to some of the work that Rebecca was doing, looking at ensuring that we can influence the use of language as it relates to autism in government activities, that when they're developing policy, writing documents, that they are using the language that is acceptable to the autistic community. Next. January was when the Senate committee announced that they were going to be issuing a draft legislation that would require a national autism strategy and attach to it a time frame. CASDA mobilized around this very quickly. We analyzed the bill, submitted some feedback on it, and were then invited as the list of witnesses to address it. We had some excellent questions from the floor, some interesting dialogue and so on, and we were able to follow up with a document submitted to them that answered the questions of the senators and also proposed some language that would strengthen the bill. Next. As I said, so we testified. That was a very interesting experience, and I feel confident that as a result of the testifying that quite a number of our members made, it was very, very impactful on the senators. We heard back from them about how we had broadened their understanding and perspective on the importance of this bill, particularly as we made it real for them about what this bill actually means, what a strategy really means for the lives of autistic individuals, their families, the people who care for them, and their communities. Next. And this is where we have been able to secure an ongoing, very visible role for Debbie Irish, even as she tries to step down from her leadership role in CASDA. And that is that in collaboration with 5 other organizations, we have been awarded the Secretariat for the Pan Disability Coalition grant, and Debbie will be leading that on behalf of CASDA, focusing on the collective impact and building capacity within the sector. I hope you begin to see that there are a number of themes that are emerging here. And one is that we have been very effective in engaging with other disabilities and the disability sector broadly, and continuing to add an autism lens to that. And I think that's breaking down that barrier of people thinking that autism was just over there. We were our own little piece on our own. It's absolutely not the case. Our next slide is Inclusion at Work, a series of webinars that included Inclusion Canada, Ready, Willing, and Able, and the Inclusive Workplace, providing practical and applied strategies that support inclusive hiring and sharing examples about how businesses can build accessibility and how inclusive workplaces benefit from everyone, for everyone. And I'm hoping that you've been seeing some of the things that have been written in the newspaper recently, a number of articles articulating how employers and workplaces are being quite vocal about how the inclusion of people with disabilities and autistic individuals are adding value to their workplace environment. Now, if I keep going on this, I've got just two more things that talk about what happened in April. They're not technically a year in review because it's this year, but we did have our most recent summit just recently, about 300 attendees, and it was the first time that we were able to award the Jim and Jeanette Autism Leadership Award to Whitney Hodgins. And I have to say that was an unbelievable experience, receiving those nominations and then coming across a nomination for a person who made such an incredible but quiet contribution and leadership to the field of autism. And I certainly hope that we find a way to keep Whitney Hodgins close to our hearts and involved with us in CASDA. And the last piece before I pass this over is to announce that Ready, Willing, and Able was able to secure continued funding of $20 million. And that project that is jointly sponsored by Inclusion Canada and CASDA will continue to move forward with this 3-year investment. And that's it. I turn it over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marg. And just to get us back onto the agenda, I did want to provide a very warm welcome to the new board members just elected in. And I would like to now call upon our Shad Zaver, CASDA's treasurer, to present CASDA's audited financial statements for 2021.
Thank you, Debbie. So, as Debbie mentioned, this agenda item relates to the annual approval of the financial statements. So I'd like to proceed by providing a high-level overview of the statements. So if you proceed to the next slide, you'll see that page 3 of the financial statements, which the members were provided with, relates to the independent auditor's report. It outlines that the financial statements represent fairly in all material respects the financial position of CASDA as at December 31st, 2021, in addition to the results of operations and cash flows for the year ended in accordance with Canadian accounting standards for not-for-profit organizations. So this indicates a clean audit and the most desired audit opinion and what every treasurer aspires for. Move on to the next slide, please. So if you move on to page 5 of the audited financial statements, you'll see that the statement of financial position as at December 31st, 2021. So this statement provides a snapshot of the finances as of that date. Cash is the largest asset base with CASDA, comprising of 82% of total assets. So one important consideration that the Internal Affairs Committee will have to consider is whether the organization can benefit from an investment portfolio to hold on to cash that is not required. If you move on to the next slide. Page 6 of the audited financial statements is the statement of operations and changes in net assets. So this highlights the results of the entire year by looking at the organization's revenues and expenditures. So revenues were 70% greater than the prior year. If you have a look at the graph at the bottom, it highlights that operations contributed to 46% of total revenue, and this comprises of revenue from the Federal Summer Student Grant Program, the Ready, Willing, and Able communications, social media, and overhead revenue that is not a separate restricted grant. We have our membership revenue and interest revenue. The Can-Do or Social Development Partnership Program federal grant contributes to 21% of total revenue. The annual summit contributed to 9% of total revenue, and revenue from Ready, Willing, and Able contributed to 11% of overall revenue, and finally, other partnerships amounted to 13% of total revenue. Moving on to the next slide, you'll see that total expenses increased by 70%, and that was mainly driven to increase in staff wages. As you know, CASDA grew as an organization due to the number of projects that we are involved with, and with that comes an increase to resources needed to manage those projects. In 2020, we only had 4 staff on payroll, but comparing that to 2021, we had 8 staff on payroll plus 9 summer students. So that is a summary of the 2021 audited financial statements. Could I get a motion to approve the 2021 financial statements?
I approve. Debbie?
I'll second.
Thank you.
Any questions while we wait for the poll?
Debbie, we have a question from a member. I gave the member Dan Ten Van permission to talk. So
Thank you. Go ahead, Dan. Dan, are you able to unmute?
or as an alternative, if you're not able to speak, feel free to share a question in the chat.
Okay, perhaps he's walked away from his computer.
I will end the poll.
Thank you. Motion passed.
So, did you want me to continue, Debbie?
Please.
Okay, so next is the next agenda item relates to the appointment of the auditor. So I'd like to get a motion to approve that Levy, Casey, Carter, McLean Chartered Professional Accountants are hereby reappointed the public accountant of the corporation to hold office until the close of the next annual members meeting or until a successor is appointed at such remuneration as may be fixed by the directors, and the directors are hereby authorized to fix such remuneration. Can I get a motion to approve?
I move. Debbie?
Second, it's Sheena.
Motion passed. Thank you, Arshad. I'd like to call upon our new board member, Pascale, who will introduce a special resolution to change CASDA's name. This name change was introduced at this year's summit. This name change was suggested by the autistic community to reflect updated and respectful language. Pascale?
Yeah. Here is the special resolution to approve the corporate name change. Be it approved that the name of the organization be changed from Canadian Autism Spectrum Disorder Alliance to Autism Alliance of Canada, as well as l'Alliance canadienne des troubles du spectre de l'autisme to Alliance canadienne de l'autisme.
I support the motion. Sue Koch.
Seconded from Brian.
All in favor, the poll will come up. Motion passed. And I'll just call on Rebecca for the next agenda item.
Okay. Before we finish our proceedings, we would be remiss if we didn't recognize the contributions made by Debbie Irish. At the end of the month, she will be finishing her term as chair of the board. Well, actually 2 terms, as she was doing such a great job. We couldn't let her go after just getting us started on her new directions. The last 4 years under Debbie's guidance have been transformative for CASDA. To list just a few of the growth areas she has led us through: building the capacity for and securing the funding for summer students, followed by research fellows, PhD students, and the list goes on. She and Jonathan have been a powerhouse duo in this regard. Securing the funding for and then hiring core staff to enable CASDA to fulfill its aspirations as a driving force to advance the National Autism Strategy. She empowered this new staff group to envision a new era for CASDA beyond finally getting a National Autism Strategy a reality. Debbie has led us through not just 1, but 2 strategic planning processes. She showed the leadership necessary to support a name change and a shift in organizational objectives. And not least of all, steering CASDA forward with true engagement of autistics, ensuring their voices and in fact their hard work could be integrated into all CASDA activities. There are more that can be added to this list, but I'm sure she is already ready to be out of the spotlight as it is. So I will leave it as this incomplete list for her contributions to CASDA. Oh, wait, one last thing. Debbie was the brains behind developing the Leadership Summit and creating the Jim and Jeanette Munson Autism Leadership Award. Now, there were some who dared to wonder those 4 years ago whether it was the right thing for CASDA to have a chair that did not work in an autism-specific organization. Through Debbie's tenure, CASDA has been able to show that it embraces a wide range of committed Canadians who want to work together to secure a national autism strategy. She ensured we have a bigger tent and one that is both inclusive and diverse. She led CASDA to a heightened profile at the federal level and among our members. Debbie has spent her entire professional career committed to a better life for Canadians, facing the challenges, discrimination, and lack of inclusion that comes with having a disability. She honed her focus on autism while at the Geneva Centre for Autism and brought the skills she acquired while at Toronto Community Living in Geneva Centre to a leadership role at CCRW, bringing her brand of awareness, advocacy, and human rights into the discussion of workplace opportunities. Yes, Debbie has absolutely been the right chair for CASDA, the right person at the right time, bringing the right leadership to our organization. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. It is really hard to believe that I am stepping back because CASDA has truly been a big part of my career and my life. And I know that I will stay engaged because I have committed to supporting John ongoingly in whatever operational needs he might have. But again, thank you very much for your kind words. So I would like to thank you all that have stayed with us for the AGM and move us very quickly on to the panel discussion. And with that, I motion to conclude the meeting today.
I so move. Sue Coke.
Thank you.
Kim, I'll second.
Thank you, Kim. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shino to introduce the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Sheena Nakani, and I am the Vice Chair at CASDA and have the pleasure of moderating this very important panel presentation today. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge that what we call Alberta is the traditional and ancestral territory of many peoples, presently subject to Treaty 6, 7, and 8, namely the Blackfoot Confederacy, Kainai, Piikani, and the Siksika, the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, Stoney Nakoda, and the Tsuut'ina Nation, and the Métis people of Alberta. This includes the Métis settlements and the 6 regions of the Métis Nation of Alberta within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who have lived and cared for these lands for generations. We are grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today and those who have gone before us. We make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on or visiting. Today's panel presentation is titled Exploring Community Support Through Indigenous Perspectives in Alberta. I have the honor of introducing Grant Bruno, Chair of Autism Society Alberta's Indigenous Relations Circle. All the panelists you see here today are members of this circle, and I will ask Grant to introduce himself, tell you a little bit about the circle, and provide opening remarks. Grant?
Yeah, Tanse, Grant Bruno, Nasiga Sin, Miskaiksik, Ekwa, Musqueam, Ochinia. Hello, everybody. My name is Grant Bruno, and I'm from the communities of Enoch Cree Nation, which is just west of Edmonton, and Musqueam, which is about an hour's south drive of Edmonton as well. So this circle really started, I think, when I did Circle Keeper training. So I was able to do this training through what's known as the National Compadres Network. And over the training, I learned how to do different circles, right? So you have wisdom circles, sharing circles, education circles, healing circles. And through these circles, what I learned is that they're very powerful and effective way of engaging multiple people, right? So we often do committee work within Western institutions, and I felt that that didn't really fit in within, my worldview, as well as some of the worldviews who are also on the circle. And so me and Lyndon Prakin, who of course works with Autism Alberta, as well as the director of Autism Calgary, we had a conversation just as, fathers of autistic children. And one thing led to another, and then this kind of formed out of the Autism Alberta Alliance Planning Committee. And so I invited some people from my network to, join this circle, because I really felt that it was missing, right? There is, unfortunately, autistic Indigenous individuals are often rendered invisible. And this happens right across the country. And so I felt like it was just a really good opportunity for me, not only to connect with other like-minded and passionate individuals, but also start to build that awareness, right? Start to connect with people right across Alberta. And I feel like our perspectives, we have, Blackfoot perspectives, we have Cree, we have Métis, we have, autistic perspectives, we have parents and siblings, and elders as well. And so I believe that our perspectives and what we bring to the circle really allows us to share our wisdom with each other. And then we're able to take that wisdom away from us and bring it to our communities and our organizations and our families. And so the circle is an important component to everything that happens, especially I'm going to just talk about Cree people. And so if you ever go to a ceremony, it's often in a circle, right? A sweat lodge is circular. Sundance, circular. Go to a powwow, circular. Round dance, of course, is round. And it's something that I've learned is we use circles because there's no beginning and no end, right? You can come and join the circle whenever you want. It's inclusive. Everybody has the same right to talk and share, and nobody's above each other. I'm definitely not above anybody else within the circle. I feel like I'm a part of the circle and not hierarchical, right? So with that being said, I really want to, I'm excited for this panel because I feel like I've been speaking on my own, but the real knowledge is within this circle. I'm just one person. I'm a parent. I'm a researcher. But at the same time, I think that everything that I've learned through the circle has really benefited me. And I know it's going to benefit everybody here as well, because there's so much knowledge, there's so much experience, and there's so much passion within this circle that every time I leave the circle, and we meet monthly, I feel like it nourishes me. It nourishes my spirit. It nourishes who I am as a parent, and allows me to leave what I need to leave within the circle, but take the good as well. So with that being said, I think we can start. I think it's a round of introductions, right, Gina?
Yes, we can definitely start with that. So I'd like to introduce everybody to our panelists today, and each panelist is going to do a quick introduction. So I'll start with Pearl.
Okay, Adamix Gnotini, Nathanico Pearl Yellow Old Woman Healy. I am half Blackfoot on my paternal side, from the Blackfoot Nation, Siksika Nation, located an hour east of Calgary. And on my mother's side, I am Ojibwe Cree, from Northern Manitoba, from the Harper family. And thank you.
Thank you, Pearl. I'm going to go to Stephanie.
Thank you, Shino. My name is Stephanie James. I am of mixed ancestry. My father is Stalo from Seward Island First Nation in BC. I'm the mother of a 9-year-old neurodiverse son. I am a family support worker. I have experience working within my own community and as a family support worker. And I'm grateful to share our thoughts and this discussion. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm going to go to Janice.
My name's Janice Pounder. I'm from the Crow's Nest Pass in southern Alberta. I work at Crow's Nest Community Support Society. We support disabled adults of PAN disabilities. Last year, one of the ladies I work with joined Autism Alberta, and she represents our company. We've opened a new office in the Pincher Creek area, and we work with Indigenous, and we work with children right all the way up into adults with the joining of the Autism Alberta program. And I joined the Indigenous Relations Circle last year, and I am enjoying everything that I get to do with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. Amy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Amy Quintel. I am a settler. My ancestors are from the Netherlands and Russia. I married into a Métis family from Lac Saint Anne in Alberta. And our household is neurodivergent and we have disability. Myself and my middle son are ADHDers, and my youngest son has medical complexities and disabilities. And I am also an Indigenous Master of Social Work student through Blue Quills.
Thank you, Amy. And last, Brandon.
Hello, I am Brandon. I am a father to an 8-year-old with autism. After going through the processes of his stuff, I myself got an autism diagnosis in the summer of 2020. I am proud to be the Family Resource Coordinator for Autism Alberta's Family Resource Centers here on Treaty 7 territory in Lethbridge, Alberta. And I'm also the president of our local autism chapter, Chinook Autism Society, where we help low-income families be able to get those sensory items or whatever items are needed to help with daily life. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Brandon. So just to give an overview of what we're doing today, I will now be asking each of the panelists 3 questions. As we only have 60 minutes, we might have time for question and answer period, but we'll see how this goes. If you do have any questions, however, just in case we do get to a question and answer period, please feel free to put it into the chat. So let's get started. Question 1. How do we provide culturally informed and or culturally safe informed supports and services? And I'm going to start with Grant.
Yeah, so for anybody there that's working with our communities, I think it's really important to kind of recognize the difference between culturally informed and culturally safe, right? So culturally safe is like a type of training you can do. I know the Sanyaj training organization in BC offers that kind of training. And it really gets into the details around, how does racism affect Indigenous peoples within Canada? It gets into power dynamics. It gets into the oppression. It really allows you to take a step further than what you're really, I think as Canadians, most Canadians were severely misinformed about Indigenous peoples. It really allows you to come to a better understanding of why Indigenous peoples are the way they are today. And, some of the solutions that we can work to together. So it's really about self-reflection, I would say, and it's really about unpacking your own biases, which will allow you to provide better and safer care. And the other piece to that is culturally informed, right? So I've been having conversations in Maskwacis with educators, parents, service providers, and this is huge in our community. So I'm really grateful that Maskwacis is the way it is, because it's really rich in culture. And this culture, the language, ceremony, cultural activities, elders, we're really trying to start to put the culture within all supports, right? So for example, there's talk about doing, on the land services, on the land speech language, on the land occupational therapy. And so these types of services, you can start to decolonize them a bit. You start bringing in the language, you start bringing in elders for that extra support. You start doing things through kinship and not in like this little box, sterile box that you can get within, Western institutions. And so I think it's really important, if you want to take that approach, that you bring in like Indigenous peoples right away, not as an afterthought, but as when you're planning and you're beginning these discussions, you do it right away and you prioritize those relationships to make sure that whatever you're doing is going to be culturally appropriate and respectful.
Thank you, Grant. Same question, Pearl.
Thank you, Grant. Everything Grant said. Yes, I do. I agree that when working with our communities, just to know that there are over 600 unique and distinct First Nations communities across Canada, each with their own cultural perspectives and languages and practices and ceremonies to how they run and do things within the community. So yes, it is very important to start perhaps with a cultural advisory board, or reach out to start having an Indigenous representation sitting in those seats at the table, because those voices will really give a diverse and in-depth perspective of those community needs. I think I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Pearl. Stephanie, your thoughts?
Thank you, Grant and Pearl. I also echo some of those statements. I think for me, the biggest thing is to just understand some of the historical contexts and how those have had implications on today's how things are going. And so I think also the desire to learn can go a really long way. And so if you have a desire to learn and you want to be more culturally aware and informed, that can be itself the most powerful tool. And just reaching out and connecting with people and understanding that there are different worldviews. So looking at a Western and a colonial worldview is very different from an Indigenous worldview, and also being cautious not to pan-Indigenize communities and recognizing that within each community, they've got systems and ways of doing things, and that's different from another community. And it's, very important to just understand that although it is one Indigenous umbrella, there are multiple different ways of doing things under that.
Thank you, Stephanie. Amy.
I echo what others have said as well. As a non-Indigenous service provider and someone who's been on this learning journey for a long time now, I guess it means ceremony-informed practice for me, and that doesn't necessarily mean I'm just going to any ceremony. I'm walking in a way that is in ethics with the family and the community that I'm working with, and centered around that. So like as a social worker, I wouldn't only be looking at the Western code of ethics. I'm looking, what are the code of ethics of that community? And what is that telling me? And what ceremonies does that community engage in? And how does that relate to the work that we're doing with families? And so sometimes that means, well, most of the time that means you are attending these ceremonies with families. You're practicing in that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Brandon.
Well, these fellow panelists have really nailed that question. Going off of what Pearl said, that there's 600 different communities. I love engaging with my local community members, chatting with elders when possible, just learning all the local stuff that I can help with. cultural training via workshops, like what Grant brought up, is fantastic as well. We see that fantastic program that the University of Alberta had on, which was just great to take, but not assuming where they come from, what trauma they may have as well, not inserting your own story, just listening.
Thank you, Brand. And finally, Janice.
As well, I concur with my fellow panelists. Nailed it. It's good. A couple of thoughts from my side. I am Métis, and recently I did take some Indigenous Perspective Society training, so cultural awareness, and I found it to be really educational. So coming from a different perspective of learning the different customs and what's expected, it really makes you change how you view and relate to Indigenous groups. So education and awareness are big key steps. So that's just kind of my adding onto what has already been said. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. Second question to the panel, and I think this is one that I get asked quite a bit, and so I'm really interested in your answers. How do we support or offer support as an ally? Grant?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I like bringing this fact up. So my wife's finishing her master's in public health here at the University of Alberta. And one of her findings was actually really simple and really practical, but I think it really just shows the power and impact you can have with, building relationships. And these allies who were considered really good allies in the community. Her research question was, what does good allyship look for in healthcare by non-Indigenous people? And one of her main findings was listen more than you speak. And that seems really simple, right? It seems like something like, oh, yeah, of course. But next time you're working with, you see an Indigenous person from across from you, just be really mindful that, and I'm guilty of this. I start formulating responses before the person's done talking. And I've learned how to pause that and really allow myself to be present. Because once you start feeling heard on the other end as an Indigenous person, you're going to have more buy-in, right? You're going to have a better relationship. And so the second piece to this is definitely prioritize those relationships. Now, everything happens. We're very relational people here. I'm speaking just on behalf of Cree again, but we're all about our relationships, right? So we adhere to there's a legal tradition that Cree people follow. It's called Wet'suwet'en. And Wet'suwet'en is the law of relationships. Now, it's not just relationships with each other, which are really important, but it's relationships to the land, it's relationships to your community, it's relationships to, outsiders. It's also relationships to yourself. And so when you're wanting to be a good ally, I think you have to really think about that in a relational way rather than transactional, right? So a lot of service providers or people who work in our communities, they're getting paid. So they see it as a transaction first. And you have to see it as a relationship first, something you build, but also something you maintain, because there's often people who are kind of communities and they get overwhelmed and they start to, and they're unable to do the work because they think of it as a transaction and not a relationship and not something you foster and build.
Pearl.
Thank you for that. Wow, this is such a huge question. How do we support as an ally? Well, I guess being informed, of course, number one across the board is being your own scholar, going out and educating yourself, looking at the Royal Commission of Aboriginal Peoples report, looking at the 94 calls to reconciliation. What are those? Each of those calls to action are formed from studies and from recommendations from Aboriginal institutions and organizations across the country. They are really, really good lit reviews if you put them all together to really form how we work with Indigenous people. The work has been done by the Indigenous people themselves. So when we're listening to those voices, those are the voices of our elders and our knowledge keepers and our people with those experiences offering recommendations. So they have already voiced those. It's just a matter of really empathetically listening to those and implementing those into practices with within our organizations. Another aspect of that, I know that I heard that CASDA is from this meeting that there's a lot of research going on. That's a big component too, is how do we conduct ethical Indigenous research with our communities, right? So without really going into it, I did my PhD dissertation on Indigenous research using Indigenous paradigms, using a Blackfoot philosophy. I also utilized Indigenous methodologies and data analysis. So that was all translated into Blackfoot. So this is an example for fellow Blackfoot scholars coming into these areas, especially with research on how to conduct ethical research. And the bottom line is relationships. So I'll leave that there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Pearl. Stephanie, your thoughts?
Thank you. Yeah, again, I also echo. I think that one of the most important pieces is that relationship building. And so reaching out to community members and stakeholders and offering protocol when connecting with elders and knowledge keepers and asking for their guidance and their views and making sure that that is strongly implemented in any support that you're providing. Another one is just, as Pearl had mentioned, the TRC call to action number 18 and 19. Both are very applicable in what we're discussing here today. And also, when offering support, I think it's really important to build upon pre-existing strengths that people are utilizing. So recognizing what's already going well and how can I support that in ways that will help build it up and not come in with an imposing view or an individual view that that you may already have. So just keeping an open mind and making sure that you're building upon what's already working well and collaborating and speaking with people who already have voices and do deserve to be heard and respected.
Thank you, Stephanie. And again, the question, how do we support or offer support as an ally? Brandon, over to you.
Yes, I was very excited to ask this question to local community members that I work with. And honestly, the biggest answer I got was just one word: listen. Be respectful, have empathy. We'll never know the extent of what people are going through. And listen without interruption, like what Grant was saying earlier. Put your own story on hold and acknowledging how they feel. And like Pearl and Stephanie said as well, following the steps to reconciliation. The work's already laid out, like Pearl said there. So thank you.
Amy.
I would echo what everyone else has said. I'm not sure what else I would have to add, except for on the relationship piece that everybody has talked about. A lot of times there's angst around professional relationships and dual relationships, and those types of things are irrelevant, I have found, in working in Indigenous spaces. The relationship continues long after any sort of professional relationship, as you might call it, ends. And so, like a lot of clients that have worked with residential school claims 15 years ago, there's still relationships there, and those are lifelong. You continue those relationships. So I would also say to expect to continue that, and like Grant had said too, like to nurture those and maintain them.
Thank you. And finally, Janice.
Well, I concur. You guys kind of covered it all, but a couple of key points. Again, just the building of relationships first and foremost with all the stakeholders, and doing that with humility. Then the other one thing with I think it's important to walk along with these families and individuals that need the ally. Some of them need to know that they're not alone in exploring and requiring their alternative supports, and just follow up with these people. Make sure you stay in contact. Reliability and honesty are the key. So thank you. That's what I have to add.
Thank you. My final question, and I think that panelists, you can spend a little bit more time expanding on your thoughts here. Final question, challenges and opportunities happening in your community. What does a national autism strategy look like for Indigenous communities? Grant.
So this question is very complex, but I'll try my best. And so I know the idea of pan-Indigenization was brought up by Stephanie. I think that's a really important thing. One thing that Canada is not very good at is engaging nationally with our communities, right? So as much as so CASDA is doing some great work. I'm really, inspired by some of the work they're doing, but the engagement for Indigenous communities, I don't see it, right? I don't see the ability or the capacity to be able to engage us in a really meaningful way. And the reason for that is a lot of people it's really difficult. It's a huge challenge to be able to engage with multiple, tribes and languages and different experiences. We have, the Inuit up north, Métis experiences, First Nations, which of course includes, 600 different tribes. And that is a huge challenge. It's not, there's no one size fits all. It's very nuanced in each area as well. So my approach would be really start to take more of a grassroots approach. So right now, there's this idea that you got to go engage with, the Assembly First Nations or the Métis Nation of Alberta, whatever else. And don't get me wrong, those are great places to start, but we're still not engaging the people who really need it, which is the people, for me, the individuals who live on reserve, who don't have any access to resources. I would argue that autistic children and adults who live on a reserve are among the most marginalized group within Canada. And if your engagements or your strategy is not reaching those people, then you're doing it wrong. Because if you want to take a true equitable lens, those are the people you have to reach. And so as you're engaging, as you're trying to engage, you really need to bring on people who are champions within their communities, right? So for example, I would argue everybody who is in this circle are the people we should be engaging because they know the communities. And as much as we want to bring in leadership doesn't represent everybody. And I find with my PhD research, I'm taking that approach. I'm taking a grassroots approach that really allows me to learn, to experience, and to give something back, right? So that would be just one option. But of course, making sure that it's distinction based too, right? So you have an approach that is specific for Métis people. You have an approach that's specific for First Nations, or even by treaty, right? An approach that's specific for the Inuit, because this idea that you can engage the same way with each group it can cause harm. And you're really leaving out like different, I think different approaches to engaging is definitely the approach. And don't get me wrong, like I said, it's a challenge. It's a challenge for me. Even though I'm a community member and I have a network within the community, I still find it challenging, but it's definitely worth it, because if you really want those results that are going to reach those people that really need it, you got to be more open to how things are happening at the grassroots level.
Thank you, Grant. Pearl, what are your thoughts? And I'm just going to read this again. Challenges and opportunities happening in your community. What does a national autism strategy look like for Indigenous communities? Pearl?
So I'm a mother of an adult child on the spectrum. She's 29. And I'm also have two boys who are have ADHD and anxiety. I've also been a teacher as a special needs teacher for the last 20 years within First Nations communities and in my own community. Then I switched over into health research because I really seen that there was a need. I found that as a teacher, I was becoming a resource and a resource only. And that was not okay. We needed to reach out there and look at how these health systems are really impacting our communities. As you know, for our health and our education, we are under the Indian Act deemed a federal jurisdictional funding responsibility. So with that comes some nuances and complexities regarding funding, especially if our children are living on reserve. They don't receive equity and funding for certain services. Now, if they leave the reserve, in order to access these reserves, they become provincial. And then they have, because they have a provincial residence, they're still legally defined under the Indian Act as an Indian, and still have some may have status. So they will use that sometimes to create barriers for funding. saying that you're a federal responsibility. So that still happens to this day. But that's one of the major challenges. And in particular is the Pdd funding for Alberta. So our adults, our teens who are 17 years old today, who are turning 18 tomorrow, will not receive Pdd funding if they're living on reserve. They are eligible for Pdd, but they don't receive the funding because it's a complex and nuanced system. So that's, I'm just putting that out there because that's the reality of our individuals in our community. Opportunities are to really start building those collaborations with the community. What can your services provide to the community? Are you willing to come to the community to provide some service supports? So those are things that we've been working on in my community, is building that relationship and collaboration with partnerships and agencies coming onto the reserve to support our children with extraordinary needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Pearl. Stephanie.
Yeah, again, just echoing what you guys said. Those are some really great points. I think, yeah, a national autism strategy would be a step towards reconciliation. And it's also very important to recognize some of those jurisdictional barriers and how those are impacting families and how that's showing up in the lack of services for families. And again, the biggest thing is creating policies and procedures and service provision with consensus-based decision-making. So making sure that there are Indigenous voices for the community that will be served at the table when making any type of decision or any plan or implementing anything at all. There really does need to be those voices there and heard.
Brandon.
Thank you. I've been with Chinook Autism Society here in Lethbridge for the past 6 or 7 years. And with Chinook Autism, we decided to kind of move on from autism awareness to autism acceptance. Living next to the largest reserve in Canada, the Blood Reserve, at 545 square miles, makes me realize we're not there yet. We're still on autism awareness. I talked to a family the other week that was actually helping set up the first autism walk on the Blood Reserve. And hearing that there are adults on this reserve that are autistic and don't even know what autism means made me realize we have a lot more work to do. That's the biggest takeaway I've took doing this job that I have for the last few years, that we're not at autism acceptance yet. We're still at awareness in these areas. As a national autism strategy, I love the way Grant worded it. You can't have a blanket approach. Like Pearl said again, there's 600 different Indigenous communities. A blanket approach does not work. So going by treaty land or however, treating each Indigenous culture according to their culture. So that's what I'm seeing in my local area, as well as one thing I want to talk about is access to technology, computers, laptops, Wi-Fi. A lot of government programs are trying to switch to online applications, and that's a big issue. Like I said, 545 square miles on the prairies here, there's not Wi-Fi readily available, let alone people being able to afford a laptop or computer to do those things. So that is one other thing in my area that I would like to bring attention that I don't know if many people may think about, but with all these programs and everything's done online nowadays, do we think about those families that are still on reserve that don't have access to any of these luxuries? Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. That's a very good point. Amy.
Thanks, Shino. I think I'm going to pass on this one because I don't have lived experience. I'm an outsider to Indigenous communities, and so I'll just pass it on to the next person.
Thank you, Amy. Janice.
Again, don't live in an Indigenous community. I haven't got a lot of experience, but as we've expanded with the Autism Alberta and going into Pincher Creek, and we have the reserves that are quite close, we're starting to reach out to them, and we want to be available to help. Some of my thoughts on the what does a national autism strategy look like? I was thinking something like creation of a family support model that's filled with traditional language, cultural, land, and nature-based strategies, be established and a strong rooted system of identity for them. This could be nurtured and protected by a commitment to action from all levels of government. And so we need to give back the power to the families to provide them with the tools, supports, and resources, because they need to use these so that their children, for their future and for future generations, can not see the same things happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. Well, those are all my questions, and I think we're kind of ending on time here, but I just want to thank all the panelists for their time and sharing their wisdom and their experiences with us. I don't see any questions, so I'm going to pass it over to Grant to offer closing remarks and his final thoughts as chair of this circle.
Thank you, Sheena. So if you've ever heard me speak before on this topic, you know that us as Cree people, and I think most Indigenous groups, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, we approach autism and different disabilities differently than the Western, right? So one thing that I've learned in my community is the Cree word for, or the Nehiel word for autism is pito tatum, which translates as he or she thinks differently. Now, if you compare this to the Western medical model, which is a very disordered, negative way of approaching autism, our approach is more neutral, I would say. And so this neutral approach, I would argue, it encourages and it celebrates differences. It allows for the parent to really fully embrace their child just as the child is. And I find with people within the Western institutions, they're trying to do therapies and treatments until they can finally accept the child. And those are backwards, right? To me, those are very backwards. I think practicing acceptance first and then getting the services in place is a much more meaningful and appropriate approach to the autistic community. And with that being said, I would argue that autism services and supports and the strategy, these are privileges. I know a lot of Canadians feel like they should have these for their family and the government has to provide them, and the government usually does. But in our communities, we're in survival mode. We don't do clean access to clean drinking water, housing. You know, I know Brandon talked about that critical infrastructure. There's no Wi-Fi, and all these different things that are kind of layered that makes getting those services challenge. Like getting services for your child is important, but surviving to the next day is priority one. And so when we talk about equitable approaches to autism, you got to really address everything as a unit, because if you're not thinking upstream, everything that's happening downstream isn't going to work out. And so when we think about what our communities can give back as well, because our communities are filled with wisdom and resilience and strength. And so taking a strength-based shared learning approach, I would argue that Indigenous communities within Canada can share and teach about different approaches to autism that a lot of autistic people and non-autistic people would benefit from. And so as we're trying to move forward with a national strategy, I think it's really important to really listen, right? To really allow ourselves to have that shared learning opportunities and to engage in a really meaningful way that isn't tokenizing or isn't extracting information and using it for your own benefit, right? So really looking at mutual opportunities to benefit and allow us to share our own stories in our own way, because we have so many good ones and they're things that we can all learn from our community. So with that being said, I want to thank my fellow panel members. Like I said, the real experience is within the panel or within the circle. And I'm just one person, and I'm so grateful that each and every one of you, we meet monthly, and it does really, it nourishes my spirit. And so with that being said, the Cree word for I'm grateful is Nanaskoptuin, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful for all of you, and I'm grateful for everybody here that allowed me to share my experiences. And I'm sure the circle is really grateful as well. Hi.
Thank you, Grant. And on behalf of CASDA, we want to thank the panel for their time and again, their wisdom. And Debbie, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Thank you very much. And I too would like to thank the panel. That was very informative and I very much enjoyed it. This brings the AGM and the panel discussion to a close. I want to again thank each and every one of you for joining us today. This is recorded and will be available in the future. Please stay in touch. Take care. Bye-bye.